several things had to take place. The first thing we had to do was choose a ship. Well, the Missouri, in comparison, actually didn't do that much in the war, but Truman was president. This was his ship, so this was where the ceremony was going to be. We chose September 2nd, 1945, because in the Western Hemisphere it was September 1st, and that was exactly 6 years to the day the war had begun. I'm going to stay there. I'm not very good. I'm not you two. I know they have good service. That was exactly 6 years to the day the war had begun. We were in Tokyo Bay on that overcast Sunday morning with over 250 other Allied ships, but we wanted a very specific latitude and longitude. That's because Commodore Perry was in the same spot in 1853, and he was there opening up trade to Japan, so we wanted to remember him that day. Now we need to imagine the deck as it was then. Of course, we didn't have the displays out. The air vent right there was actually removed to make some more room. Our gun turret turned at a 30-degree angle. That way our allies and their staffs could make an L from the end of the deck to the wall and from the wall to the gun turret. They had built an extension deck here, and that was only for the media and journalists who had arrived from around the world to witness the ceremony. If we didn't have the tarping above us, you would have to imagine looking all the way up to the Missouri once again, and those 2,000 plus young men standing, sitting, squatting, some simply hanging off of anything they could to get a glance down on the deck. That ladder where the white canvassing is hiding a door. That was Admiral Halsey's stateroom, and he was up there waiting with Admiral Chester Nimitz and Douglas MacArthur, the Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces. The plaque represents the exact location of the table. There's actually a little backstory to the table. The British gave us a beautiful hand-carved mahogany table, and we had it set up that morning. And we went and put the instrument of surrender on it, and the table was way too small. They wouldn't fit. We had to run 2 decks below to the mess deck. I bought this nasty table from breakfast. Bring it up here. We covered it with a cloth, and it worked just fine, and no one knew the difference. Well, we served 10,000 meals a day back then, so that table went right back where it belonged. Until someone had said, maybe we should have kept the table. So there's a very small chance that we don't have the table in the Navy Academy today, but they all looked exactly the same, so you're going to get the right idea. Once the Japanese had arrived, that door opened and those gentlemen came down the ladder, and MacArthur walked right to the microphone. At 9:02 a.m. he began the ceremony, speaking of justice, tolerance, and rebuilding. Emperor Hirohito was not aboard the ship that day, however, because in Japanese culture, an emperor is like a god, and a god would never surrender. So he sent a delegation of 11, led by Foreign Minister Shigemitsu, and Shigemitsu signed on behalf of the emperor. General Meiju signed next, but he was very unhappy. He was brought up in the samurai tradition of the Bushido Code, which means death before dishonor. So what would be more dishonorable than signing over your country and surrender for the first time ever? So out of defiance, he would not sit that morning. That meant he would have to bend his knees toward his enemy. So he simply bent over, signed his name, and stepped back in line. Douglas MacArthur was the third to sign, and he signed on behalf of all of the Allies. And there's a bit of a dispute over whether he had 5 or 6 pins that day. Did that aide get that pin? We don't know. But what was important were those first 2. MacArthur had personally invited American General Wainwright and British General Percival aboard the ship for the ceremony. When MacArthur sat down to sign, he motioned for them to come and stand behind him to his left, and they did. Both men stood over 6 feet tall, but neither of them were more than 100 pounds. They had spent the last 3 years in Japanese POW camps, and MacArthur wanted them there to symbolize all of the prisoners of war. Admiral Chester Nimitz had the honor of signing for the United States next, and the rest of our allies who represented them in the order in which they signed are listed on that black plaque above the open doorway. When the last ally finished signing, MacArthur returned to the microphone to end the ceremony by saying, "I pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always. These proceedings are now closed." And it took only 23 minutes to end the war that cost over 65 million people their lives. Over 50 million of those were civilians. But once the Japanese departed, MacArthur addressed the world through the media, and then he leaned over to Bull Halsey and said, "Let him fly." And thousands of Allied aircrafts left Japan flying over Tokyo Bay. Some came so close the men on the Missouri said they needed to duck. And the sun poked through that cloudy morning just long enough to shower Tokyo Bay in the decadent sunlight. Now we have facsimiles of the instrument to surrender.